to the House of the Seven Gables and one of our other 17th century houses, which is the Cooper Hathaway House. And we are delighted to be a part of the citywide Salem Women's History Day. We hope that you've been taking advantage of the tours, the exhibits, and everything going on around the city. But we are especially thrilled to introduce our author, our first author of the day, Dina Vargo, who will be speaking on the wild women of Boston and also maybe a little bit of her other new research that she's working on as well. The House of the Seven Gables is a rich women's history as well, so I think that this is a perfect compliment to have you here. So, welcome.
Thanks so much. Thanks for coming out. We tried to make it a little springy for you, but after 6 o'clock today, I'm making absolutely no promises about what that's all about. Wild Women of Boston. This was published, my book was published last May. And I tried to make it not your typical women's history book. And what that means is, actually, let me introduce Melanie, my girlfriend, my partner, and also my slide clicker. So I don't know what our signal's going to be. Slide, like a little. Yeah. The next slide. Very good. Okay, now that wasn't practice. Good. We're getting it together. So, what my inspiration really for the book is to make it about these women, right? Not these women specifically, but this type of woman. Because there are a ton of women who could have been included in this book. There are a lot of strong women in Boston, the Boston area, historically, a lot of firsts. And I sort of just didn't want to make it the same characters over and over again. You've all heard about Anne Hutchinson, and you've heard about Mary Dyer, and those types of people. So I kind of wanted to make it a little bit different. I was also sort of inspired by this picture because I found it hanging in Carrie Nation, you know, the bar in downtown Boston, Carrie Nation. And Carrie Nation was herself a very wild woman, not from Boston, but from Cincinnati. And she was a leader in the temperance movement, the prohibition movement. And she would carry a hatchet with her wherever she went. And she would just smash bars apart. And, she really made a point. And these are sort of her acolytes. Yeah, very strong woman. And it was in Carrie Nation. This picture is sort of like back when you go to the back cocktail room that looks like a speakeasy, and the bathrooms are back there, and I overheard a guy, and I'm not going to do any male bashing, just so you know, guys in the back. But I overheard this guy say, well, don't worry, my lips would never touch one of you, because like apparently they're not, like no one's a supermodel. And I just sort of feel like, first off, listen, George Clooney. Okay. First off, maybe they wouldn't have wanted to catch you. Secondly, that's just not the point, right? They're making a point of, their temperance movement is really all about protecting women and children from their husbands, from drinking too much, drinking away paychecks, coming home, maybe beating up their wives, beating up their children, leaving their home altogether. So really the temperance movement started as a women and children's movement. And these women may have lost friends over their activities, over their protests. They may have lost family members. I mean, they really came out of the boundaries of what they were allowed to do at that time. And so they were wild women. And they also had senses of humor. I mean, look at them. They're really mugging it up for the camera, right? So I also sort of wanted to infuse a little bit of life and a little bit of humor into my style of women's history book. The publisher, on the other hand, also wanted me to include a lot of criminals. Okay, so, which I did. You can't make just a book about all about female criminals. But I tried my best, so. It's going to be totally smooth. So I did include a couple, and I just want to go over just a couple of the characters included in the book so you get a flavor, and then I'm going to do a deep dive into someone I'd like to include in my next book, if there is a next book. Hopefully there's a next book. And then bring it back to a last segment that I call She's Got Issues. So this is Jolly Jane some of the newspaper article here. She was a nurse who had favorite patients and patients she didn't like a lot, and those patients wound up dead. And she had no idea how many she killed. Whenever authorities finally caught up with her, she had no way of accounting of how many people she'd actually killed. And there's also Mina Crandon. She was a so-called medium, and these are some of her spirits that she's conjuring for you here. She was very popular in the 1920s and 1930s, and this sort of spiritualism that was very popular at the time. And it took no less than Harry Houdini, who was very interested in real magic and debunking fakes. Partly because she didn't like the fact that they took advantage of people that were, maybe missing their loved ones, especially after World War I, So, he took her down. And also, I'll include the debutante murderess. I think it was 1962. Susannah Clift had an argument with her boyfriend. She told him she was pregnant. He told her, "That's too bad, I'm moving to California, goodbye." And wouldn't you know, the next morning he woke up with a giant hole in his head, and she went to Brazil. And so, she eventually came back and sort of atoned for her deed. And so she's Beacon Hill debutante murderess, but also tons of good women, more good women than not. So you may or may not have heard of Mercy Otis Warren, who was sort of a propagandist during the Revolutionary War. Really interesting that she had an opportunity to write, really interesting opportunity that she was given the opportunity to learn to read and write first off, but then her family supported her in her education. And after the Revolutionary War, which she was a staunch supporter of, she was also very much against a strong federal government, and after the Constitution was written, she was very much afraid of the central government having too much power, and so advocated for several amendments to be made to the Constitution, which she called a Bill of Rights. So I don't know that she gets very much credit for coming up, coining the term Bill of Rights. But I also included, Salem's own Parker Ramond, who grew up here in Salem. Her family was a part of the Vermont family that desegregated Salem public schools. Back in the 1830s, they were the first public schools to desegregate in Massachusetts. And she would travel the country with an abolitionist message, eventually relocating to England, where she was treated much more favorably, much more kindly there, and would get married and die in Florence, Italy, after she became a doctor. Amazing. And then, Annie Kopchalski. Okay, she was from Croatia, I believe, and relocated to the west end of Boston when she was 4 or 5 years old. In the 1890s, she read a newspaper article in Boston, these two merchants arguing amongst each other that a woman could never ride a bike around the world. A man had just done it. They said a woman never could, and she said, "I'll take that bet," and she did it. In 15 months, she rode a bike that was probably a 50-pound bicycle at the time, in full woolen, and eventually she transitioned to bloomers, which was also a controversy in itself. So Annie Londonderry, because she actually, like a NASCAR driver, to liken her to a NASCAR driver, covered herself with advertisements in order to fund her trip. They also made her fund it herself. So. And lastly, I included Sally Snowman, which any of you guys could go and meet. She is the first and only lighthouse keeper who is hired by or works for the U.S. Coast Guard. The first and only. So she's been doing that, I think, since 2004. But she is she's lovely. And once summer hits, I highly recommend to everyone here to get on one of the Boston Harbor cruises and go out to the Boston Light. And she's fantastic.
Oh, so she's in Boston?
Yeah, she's in Boston, yep. All right, so my next segment, settlement housing. I wanted to tie in the settlement housing history that the House of Seven Gables had, and also talk about how settlement housing was important to women in many different ways, and in one woman's life in particular. So if you don't mind, I wanted to just go over a brief history of poor relief, if I could, because I just wanted to sort of explain settlement housing in context. And I work in the affordable housing industry for a statewide organization, and I thought settlement housing was affordable housing, and it turns out that is not at all the case. So I thought if I didn't understand it, maybe I'll just give a brief history on what settlement housing is. So, yeah. So poor relief in the colonies, whenever Boston was first founded. I just use Boston as my reference because I am a Boston by foot tour guide, a volunteer tour guide. John Winthrop, the first governor of Massachusetts, sort of states this: if your brother be in want, you can help him. If you love God, you must help him. So this is sort of like the basis of a commonwealth. Like together we succeed, together we die, you know? So this is all about us supporting each other. And further, I think he was saying in this quote that, you know, sometimes we're all going to have ups and we're all going to have downs. And so again, it's sort of incumbent on all of us to support each other whenever, you know, if I have the means, I can support you, and likewise. And so poor relief at that time was all about being supported by your family, being supported by the church, and maybe like ethnic societies, like or like the Boston Port Society. I'm thinking of, you know, something like the VFW would do now. You know, those social groups. The state, or well, there was no state then, but the city probably a lot less. In fact, if you needed poor relief at that time, they would warn you out of a town. You know, if you had come to a town and you did not have a job, and maybe a month later you still did not have a job, sayonara, you know. Go to Worcester. We don't want you here anymore. And that would be called warned out. If you had kids that you couldn't support, you would maybe ship your kids off to a farm. They could become indentured servants. But yeah, you would just sort of like scatter your family so that you could support yourself. So, you know, pretty tough going. Oh, yeah, thanks. Cotton Mather, though, was going to be one of the preeminent religious speakers and thinkers, thought leaders at the time, sort of has a different take on things, right? This is sort of ugly. For those who indulge themselves in idleness, the express command of God unto us is that we should let them starve. So this starts to, there's sort of a different way of thinking between like the deserving poor and the undeserving poor, and that we can judge. And I think the next slide. This is going to last for a really long time. This is one of the stones up in Dogtown, up in Gloucester, which I think were put up there during the Depression to sort of inspire people to work. So yeah, this is sort of like a judgment call, and things get kind of hairier, I think, about who is going to get poor support and who isn't going to get poor support. And philanthropies are able to make that decision themselves, and so there is really no safety net for people. Let's see the next slide. Okay, and so one of the ways of supporting the poor is creating, this is an almshouse that was in Charlestown, a poor house. Unfortunately, they were usually located right next to or part of an asylum and a jail. So this sort of gives you the, you know, the way they're thinking about the poor. And unfortunately, poor houses were mainly filled with women and children. Because if your husband dies, you have no way to support yourself, and you don't have family to support you, you may wind up in the poorhouse, almshouse. Later, they would make these workhouses as well. It was an idea from England. You know, let's fill up a poorhouse with spinning wheels, and women can work for their keep, or women and men in some cases can work for their keep. That really didn't work out, and so they just stuck with the poorhouse, and then would stick them as far away as possible. I believe the last poorhouse was out on Deer Island. You know, just out of sight, out of mind, right? Yeah. So, thank you. So the population is going to start to grow, particularly after the Irish potato famine, and you can see what happens to the population of Boston specifically. You know, it's just booming, and it's because of all these immigrants coming into town. And we're going to have to figure out a way of dealing with a whole new set of problems. And I like the next slide. Say hi to your family members. I always like to think, how are you doing? And whenever all these people would come in, yeah, sorry, I told you these slides were going to go quick. This is the type of place they would live in. And if we're thinking of Irish immigrants, and again, I'm sort of Boston-centric, you're going to move over to the North End, maybe the Broad Street area, and it's just going to be packed filled with tenement housing, packed filled with immigrants, and, well, let's think of the prevailing thought about immigrants at the time. It is not abject poverty which causes such nasty and cheap living. It is simply an imported habit from southern Italy. So that's Chicago. Wow. I was going to put, I knew this was not, but I didn't do this, but I was going to put guess the quote and put like maybe some presidential nominee. Yeah, so who said it first? Yeah. Exactly. That's why I love history, because there's nothing new under the sun. It all we think we're so much smarter now too, and like it just all kind of comes back. So yeah, so by and large, the way people are thinking about immigrants and the poor is that this undeserving. Clearly they're not trying hard enough. Clearly, they're just drinking away their problems. They just live in a dirty way. That's why we have the tenement housing. This, really isn't the case, and it takes settlement housing to kind of work through this. So settlement houses, I think we would think of the settlement house now as sort of a community center. So this would be whenever a lot of young, energized people would go into the community, so go into the North End, go into the South End of Boston, or Salem here, and settle amongst the poor to sort of try to bring middle class values to them. And some of the classes they could have, or offerings they would have, they would first try to reach out to children. You could reach out to children and bring children into the settlement house, then you can bring their parents in later. So little boys, they might teach gardening skills. Little girls, they kept cooking classes. And once they get to parents, they might teach them about civil service exams, English teaching, hygiene. They might even teach them about travel and culture, because they're trying to, sort of the bad side of things, they may be trying to assimilate a culture, but you're also trying to, reach out, this is America, this is the way we live, and these are the goals you can sort of reach for. But what they're also doing is figuring out not just the symptoms of poverty, but the causes of poverty. So this is the first time that they're bringing sort of like a real social science to the causes of poverty. Now, some of it is still in this undeserving, like, oh, well, they're drunk. Well, again, that's probably not the cause. It's probably a symptom or something in between. But you can see whenever they're saying cause is indicating misfortune, they're really getting to some of the causes behind it. Like, really, it's like this first section, imprisonment of a breadwinner, orphan, no male support. That's directly impacting women's lives right there. They can't find a job. May not be unemployed because they can't find a job. May not be that they're not trying to. And then there's a lot of sickness, right? Because they're too sick to work. And, if you think about why people go bankrupt today, right, isn't it usually because they lost their job and or they got sick, they had a health crisis, So these are things we've been working through for a very long time, but this is the first time they're starting to do this. And so settlement housing workers really become the first social workers, which starts that whole thing. And I'd like to think that once, just teeing this one up. So these are really young people, and this is the first time you have college-educated people. So both men and women, college-educated, excited to become a part of the community, do something, make real change. So it's just like these people. Yeah. Right, and we could have probably subbed in other ones, but I just thought this was sort of cute. So yeah, a lot of energized people. But the next slide goes into some real details, 20, 25 years old. A lot of them had attended college, graduated, may have even gone to graduate school. But then, look at that, 3/5 of settlement housing workers were women. 9/10 of those women had been to college. So these are women that are educated, have means, and want to contribute to society. Now, the reason that they're kind of wild women and of themselves is, this is what they've been told to do. And actually, these could have been two more wild women, Sarah Josepha Hale and the Beechers, Catherine Beecher and Harriet Beecher Stowe. They were publishers, they were editors, but they spoke mainly of, or wrote mainly of, the women's domain being in the home, and how that could sort of empower women, but it kept them in their home. And so these were journals dedicating to sort of like home economics for the first time. So these settlement housing workers are sort of going against the grain in that regard. This is Jane Addams, who's maybe the most famous settlement housing worker. She worked in Chicago in the Hull House. Eventually won a Nobel Peace Prize for her work in figuring out poor relief and settlement housing and poverty. So she could be big into the peace movement too, the international peace movement. But other women also contributing to this. These are women working over in a settlement house in the North End, a place called the North Bennett Street Industrial School, which still exists today in a different form. The school continues on today, sort of like a high-end craft school. They just built a new building on North Street, right down the way from Paul Revere House. The fine woodworking is what they do today. They put violins, do ceramics. I mean, really watch building, clock building, really beautiful work. So if you ever get a chance to just pop in, they have a really lovely showroom in there too. But two women who worked in the North End, the North Bennett Street Industrial School, had a group of women that they worked with. They would read with. They were called the Saturday Evening Girls Club. They're sort of early, like in their later teens, they would get together on Saturday evenings and read. But Edith Brown and her partner, Edith Guerrier, decided we needed to think of some way for them to make money. So they taught them ceramics. They actually went around Europe, collected best practices on doing ceramics, came back, set up a ceramics shop, and they produced Paul Revere pottery. Oh. So I don't know if you've heard of this, but you can see, like, this is really fine art that they were producing, just right up the street on Hall Street, so right across the way from the Old Moor Church, actually, just right up the street by the cemetery up there. So this is like the power of women, and then of course, Carolyn Emerton, who established a settlement house here at the House of Seven Gables. So this is very much a women-driven industry and social work. And now I just want to tell you about one woman that's really changed her life really, working in a settlement house. This is the young woman. I'm going to withhold her identity until the end, so we won't have missed it. Okay, we'll get here. So this young woman, suspense. It's suspense. This is like, yeah. So she was born and raised in Kansas, and to me, she just looks like Dorothy, right? That's so cute. She's very Kansas and this it was. But her father's a salesman, so she and her family actually travel all over the Midwest as a young woman. But she graduated from high school in Chicago. And for all intents and purposes, she was on her way to being in the middle class. And she had always had ideas that she would be able to support herself in some way, that she would go to college, become college educated. She was born in 1898. And unfortunately, her father was also an alcoholic, and her parents divorced. What that does is throws her family into poverty. They moved to Boston, the Boston area, Medford specifically, and kind of get along there. And she keeps trying to make attempts to go to college, and she keeps having to quit because she can't afford it. And she eventually becomes a nurse during World War I, and you can go to the next one. but she teaches English to immigrants for a while. That doesn't pay enough. She's not able to keep herself in college. She works at a hospital in Brookline. That doesn't pay enough. So she's just trying everything that she can do. She's 27 years old. She has an offer of marriage from a young man up in Marblehead. And she doesn't want to, she wants to make a go of it. She wants to be her own woman. She doesn't want to settle. So she makes her way downtown Boston to the Women's Educational Industrial Union, and that organization exists still today. The Crittenden Educational Union, I think it's, or Crittenden Women's Union, I believe it's called, but it's a merger of several different organizations, and they work with women on financial literacy today. And that's what they did then, but they also trained women on how to take on sales jobs, accounting positions, not just cleaning and mending clothes, try to really use women's brain. And this woman met with them, and she had a job interview, in which case she actually just lied through the whole thing, just trumped up all of her education and abilities because she was desperate. She was desperate to get a job. And they placed her at the Denison House, which is a settlement house. And today we would call it Chinatown. Back in the day, they would have called it the South Cove neighborhood. A lot of Chinese were moving into the area just as this woman took a position there. And this settlement house was founded by 3 women, one of whom would go on to win the Nobel Peace Prize, a woman named Emily Balch from Jamaica Plain. And it was entirely supported by memberships from all of the women's colleges. So they would pool their money, and they supported 3 settlement houses, one in New York, one in Philly, and this one here. And this one started in one house and grew to be a block long, incredibly successful. And my next slide just tries to create context of where it is. If you can hit one more. So that blue block is where the Denison House was. It's not there anymore. Tufts would be, the Tufts Hospital is up on Washington Street, if that gives you an idea.
Yeah, it's 800 Washington Street.
Oh, perfect. So you know exactly what I'm talking about. And if you hit the next one, all these little circles are saloons.
Oh.
So, yeah, and then there are a couple right up here, these little starred areas, they're all theaters. So this is still the theater district. These might have been burlesques at that time, but so it's actually really pretty amazing that women were allowed to go into this neighborhood. So they were definitely, again, reaching outside of their bounds. The next slide shows some of the classes you could take at the Denison House. So clay modeling, cooking. This Sloyd thing is like woodworking and craft work. So offering a lot of what the other settlement houses did. And young woman that I was telling you about actually worked with young children. They established a kindergarten. Kindergartens were often established for the first time in settlement houses, so another new thing that they were doing. But she was really popular. And you can go to the next slide. This is her in her car, which she called the Yellow Bomber. The kids loved her, and she loved doing this settlement housing work. She became a leader there eventually. She was like a headmistress. She got on the board of their organization, would present at their national conferences that were held in Boston. She found her life's work, really, as a social worker, until the Denison House was going to have a fundraiser.
And what is this?
Cedar Hill Waltham, which I think still exists as a park today, I'm not sure. But they wanted to drum up interest in this fundraiser that they would be having here, and so they hired the Harvard Aviation Club to take a little biplane up and throw out flyers. And this young woman had an interest in flying. She had spent some time in California, had actually learned how to fly, was friendly with the people in Quincy, which had actually established the first field for flying down that way, and she was started to get on their board and doing business with them. So she agreed, that's fine. I'll go along as a passenger on this, and we'll kind of take some pictures. And she winds up in the paper. And Amelia Earhart, right? Had, you know, dressed in this classic aviator's clothing and became a media darling after that. And this actually gets started with her aviation career. So without settlement housing as sort of a background for her, she may never have made, you know, her trip around the world or her transatlantic flight. And I just have a few other slides that, you know, she would obviously become a hero to all of us. I mean, if all of us think of Women's History Month, probably one of the first go-to is Amelia Earhart, right? And I had no idea she spent time in Boston or in settlement housing, so I think her story is pretty amazing. And lastly, I told you we'd finish up on She's Got Issues. And I think, okay, good on time. Okay, so we can hit the next one. What better way to talk about women's issues? Talk about running and the Boston Marathon, right? So I know that some of you have heard of Catherine Switzer. Has everyone heard of Catherine Switzer? Like a little mixed. So Catherine Switzer, you can go on to the next one, I think. As a young girl, decided to take up running. She actually wanted to be a cheerleader. Her dad said, no. Why don't you just do some track and field stuff? That's what she did, and she loved it. And but it was not at all acceptable for young women to run at that time. And it was kind of, again, she was an outlier. Her friends, her peers would say, oh, you're going to get thunder thighs, you know, you're going to grow really nasty hair under your armpits and stuff like that if you run a lot. So, you know, she was kind of frowned upon. She went to Syracuse University. She joined their track club, but she was the only woman on it, and she really wasn't allowed to run with the boys. They sort of did their own thing, and she teamed up with an older coach who I think the younger guys didn't really want to run with. You know, he was the older guy. And so the two of them would run together all of the time, and he would tell her stories about the Boston Marathon. He had run the Boston Marathon. At the time, maybe the field was a few hundred people. But, you know, the oldest, longest running marathon in the United States, you know, he'd just go on and on and on about it. At one point they were out running, and, you know, it was one of those rainy, cold days in Syracuse, and she was just had it. And she told her coach, you know what, stop talking about it, let's just do it. He's like, well, you can't do it. Women can't run a marathon. But he's like, but you could. I bet you could. Because they would go out and run really long runs. You know, they'd be on a 15-mile run just for fun. You know, they're not training for anything. And so she does everything that she thinks is the right thing to do. She signs up for the marathon. She, at the time, you know, you're 19 years old, and she signed, instead of Catherine Switzer, KB Switzer, because, you know, she wanted to be a writer, and it's like way cooler to say KB Switzer, right? She gets a physical. The doctor says you're absolutely okay to go. She trains. I think she did a 30-mile run on her training, you know, like she was prepared. And so the day comes, you know, in April, she and her friends come out. It's a really cold, rainy day. And she starts to run the marathon. And unfortunately, the media truck is in sort of the, is in the back of the pack. The media truck wants to get to the front of the pack. And so,
what year was this?
1967. 1967. So the media truck passes she and her friends. No one gives her a second look. She's, you know, in her sweats, you know. If anything, you know, guys might just give her the nod, and if anything, her coach is going to say, "Oh, I know. If anyone can do it, Catherine Switzer can do it. We're gonna finish this thing." And so they start to run, and the media starts to point out, "That's a woman. That's a woman. What is a woman doing here?" And so the race co-director, Jock Semple, discovers her and is not at all pleased that there is a woman running in his race. So what happens is he goes after her. He's the guy not dressed for a run, right? Yeah. He starts to grab at her number. Give me my damn number back. Her coach says, run like hell. And that's what she did. And so if we go to the next slide, if you can imagine, and this is her boyfriend, Tom. And you can see the look on Tom's face, because what happens next, you know? comes Tom.
Yeah.
Here comes Tom. And I think
Oh, yeah.
Catherine Switzer felt really horrible about this. You know, she didn't want this guy to be hurt, but, you know, it is what it is. And you can even go to the next one. I mean, look at how much she's being shoved. She's being completely accosted on a marathon. I don't know how she finished it, but she did finish it in probably around 4 hours and 20 minutes, something like that. And, you know, they let her finish. Whenever she was driving home with her friends, they're sort of, you know, patting themselves on the back. You know, we just did a marathon. This is awesome. We're awesome. And she's thinking, my life has changed because this is unacceptable. Why can't women run marathons? So she would return every year to run the marathon and was completely rogue. It wasn't until 1974 that the Boston Marathon accepted women.
Wow.
The New York Marathon was a little bit more kind, and the next picture is her running New York, which she would eventually win. But women in running became her issue, and she worked tirelessly at it. She would run, I think, 3 or 4 marathons a year just to make sure there was a woman running in that marathon.
Wow.
And there was a small group of women who also ran the marathons, and they all got to know each other, all very much supported each other in that endeavor. But she knew that the only way that marathoning or running for women would be accepted was if there were elite runners to put forth, and she needed to make herself an elite runner. So she had a full-time job. She would train in the morning. She would train after work. This became her obsession, her life. And she worked also on getting the marathon accepted into the Olympics. It wasn't until 1984 that women ran a marathon in the Olympics. So we got it all figured out, right? Like, what women in running, it's fine now, right? Because you go to a race, probably you've all participated in some race or other, whether as a supporter on the sidelines, or you've done a 3K, or Karen's not here.
Yeah.
Thanks to Karen. Yeah. Karen's like, oh, I'm training for another 100 miler. So we know that women can run, but in high school, can you see this? That is a map in the United States that you just can't see for some contrasting reasons. But there are still 3 states in the union that do not allow girls to run as long as boys in high school track. So, and that's North Dakota, Oklahoma, and Texas. And these crossed out states only about a year ago or even 6 months ago had changed their laws, had the same thing, but now the boys and girls run at the same. So girls run like a 3 or a 4K and boys run a 5K. The same thing exists, the sort of same dichotomy exists in college, cross country, right? And boys compete at an 8K and girls compete at a 6K. So there's a young woman, I read about her in Runner's World magazine, Caitlin Flanagan is her name. She asked, she was a cross country runner from Middlebury College, asked if she could run in the young men's race doing an 8K just because she wanted to time herself. She wasn't out to make a statement, make it an issue. She just wanted to run the race under officially timed conditions, And they said no. And then she really put together, well, why do the boys run an 8K and why do the girls run a 6K? This doesn't make any sense at all. And so she surveyed her friends, and I think she did an online survey of roughly 100 people through Facebook, and her girlfriends would say, well, it's because girls can't. Girls can't run as far as boys. And whether it was they felt that they were more prone to injury, or they just wouldn't have the stamina or the energy, they all thought that they couldn't do it. Boys, on the other hand, thought, yeah, you can totally do it. The guys were absolutely 100% supportive. Absolutely, you can do it. Coaches and parents feel differently. Coaches might think that girls only run for social reasons, and if they were forced to run, I saw that face. So, if girls were made to run an 8K instead of a 6K, maybe not as many girls would sign up for the sport. I don't know, but the situation still exists today. I don't know that it's going to be changed, I'm not sure. But this young woman, Katie Carlson, by name, says, I believe it has a profound psychological effect on women and girls and how we see ourselves in relation to men. sends a very subtle message that no matter how hard women run, we're seen as second best. And I would say that unfortunately you could probably replace that running with just about anything. Whether it's, you can go to the next slide, whether it's leadership or teaching, there are different standards. And it just takes reading the New York Times or any publication any day. I mean, I could have just pulled off so many articles that I've just read this week as I was preparing for this talk. What's the next one? As women, this was just in the New York Times 2 days ago, as women fill jobs that men had recently had, the pay goes down. So as much as we like to think that maybe we can explain away the pay-wage gap, it does exist. And things like this happen. If we go to the next slide here. Smile, Hillary. So, you know, it doesn't, like, you know, I'm not saying like anything about the candidate, you can support whoever you like, but really, smile, Hillary, you're screaming too much at your very crowded presentations that you're doing. Everyone has to scream at those things. So definitely a double standard in the way any of our female candidates are being treated. I love this next slide. Yeah, because unfortunately the pay gap starts at home because Highlights magazine, which all of us take a look at every time we go to the dentist. You can't find that last little glove in the tree. But Highlights surveyed its readership and found that young women do more chores at home and get paid less. So boys have more playtime. They actually spend about the same amount of time doing their homework. But boys have more playtime and girls have more chore time, and the girls do get paid less for the chores they do. So parents, grandparents, give your daughters a raise. It all starts at home. But back to running and women and the fact that we think that women can't run. This good woman can run. She's Annie Garrett. Last year in April or May, set a world record in her age group, which by the way is 70 to 80 years old, for running a half marathon in 2 hours and 15 minutes.
Wow.
Yeah. She started running whenever she was a 74-year-old woman, so I like to think that she had fresh legs. The runners get that one. Yes. Yeah, so Annie Garrett can do it, right? And she broke this record on the eve of her 80th birthday. Yeah. And the next one got, a woman just a couple of weeks ago, again, you could just really quickly find these things, broke a record for treadmill running. I think she's 43 years old. I know, awful. 12 hours on a treadmill. Wow. Yeah, that just sounds like a certain kind of hell, right? But she did it. And next, what about this woman here? You've all heard about her, right?
Yeah.
Her name's Becca Pizzi. She's from, it's Belmont. Yeah. She ran 7 marathons on 7 continents in 7 days. Wow. So we're saying 50 years ago, a woman couldn't run a marathon, and now this woman has run 7 on 7 continents in 7 days. I don't know how she did it. And she hurt her hip at one point too. And she came in under 4 hours on that one. But she, every single one of those marathons, except for the one where she hurt her hip, she did in less than 4 hours. So like the 3:50 time.
She was the first female in all of them too.
That's right. That's right. Yes. She was one of very few females to compete this year. But yeah, and I think she's a single mother and works in an ice cream store. I think she manages an ice cream store in Belmont. So, yeah. So that wraps up my talk, and I want to say that I always never think of what I'm going to say at the end of the talk. But I think that, you know, we've proven that, well, we can all be wild women. You know, whether or not we're just we're running on the trails, setting our own records, setting our own personal records, asking for a raise. You know, teaching our daughters well. I won't say voting in an election because I don't make that political. But I think all of us have it in us to be wild women in some way, shape, or form. So I hope you enjoyed the presentation. Go wild. If anyone has any questions, you can ask. But
I just have a question on the date of the lady that ran in that marathon where she was attacked. What was it year?
1967, and so I should actually follow up. So next year, 2017, 50th year anniversary, she'll be 70 years old. She's going to run it again. She'll be back. And actually, she comes back to Boston every year. You'll see her on what is it, WBC? Yeah, where they do the commentating. You can actually go and meet her. She's super sweet. She's always at the expo. Yeah, she's always at the expo, and she's super nice. But you have to wait a good long line to, to bow down to have her. But she's great, and she'll be there this year. And I think if you go to her website, they put her schedule on the website. And she's usually out and about speaking at events too. But I know she's training now for next year. As I understand it, doing court work. Don't ask me what I know about it.
What was the name of that woman that went to that college and you said you at the end of the presentation you reveal her name?
Oh wait,
Amelia Earhart.
Amelia for
Oh, okay, that was her. Right.
Yeah.
Sorry, just making sure.
Yeah, that was her. Yep.
I just want to say, when I was growing up, my mother always used to say I was going to send her to the poorhouse.
Oh.
I never knew what it was. I didn't know it was a real thing. They always used to say that. We were going to send her to the poorhouse.
Right. That's true.
I'd be like, what's poorhouse?
That's true. I always think it's so clever when it's P-O-U-R and it's like, let's go to the poorhouse. Okay. Yeah. You know what? I didn't thank the House of Seven Gables for having me.
Our pleasure.
I very much meant it.
And then, just to let everybody know, we are also celebrating the 150th birthday. I'm going to start calling her our wild woman, Caroline Emerton, here. April 21st, 1866 is when she was born, and we have our annual exhibit will be in honor of her life and legacy here in Salem and beyond. We also have on April 23rd, we're calling it Caroline's Celebration, or Caroline's Community Celebration for All, and we are doing $1.50 guided tours. We are going to have the Commonwealth Vintage Dancers here doing kind of early 20th century dance. Curbia brass bands will be here. We will have cake cutting on the hour. Ye Olde Pepper will be here with historic candy. So sweets, music, dancing, and everything in honor of our wild woman on April 23rd. So we hope that you'll join us for that. There's calendars, pamphlets, information of all of our upcoming events. And Dina will be over in our museum store following the talk. So I know some of you bought the book ahead of time, but if you'd like to go and buy the book, we have it in the gift shop, and Dina will be doing a signing as well. So thrilled to have you, and thank you so much for being here today.